There are a couple of cow types like the Gernstein and I think some Jersey and maybe some other kinds that produce A2. I think that Gernstein is exclusively A2 and then Jersey, most of them are A2. Of course, if you don't mind, goat milk, that's all A2. Camel milk is A2. And so there are options out there.
I've actually had camel milk one time. I was in a paleo
How
restaurant.
how was it?
Like 10 years ago, and they were like, "Oh, you want to try our camel milk?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't know, but okay." It was actually pretty good. It wasn't like cow's milk. It had a bit of a earthy kind of flavor to it, so it was a little bit different. But I mean, milk is milk. Goat milk isn't that bad. No, I hate goat. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Yes, I'm silly on my podcast. It makes it fun to listen to. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad. I wouldn't go, and it was very expensive. Like she was
It
like
is.
container
I
eight.
would like to taste it, but I would have to order like 30 liters or something to get it. I'm not going to do that.
You have to mortgage your house to afford it. So.
That's right. But I had a comparison. I did a test one day and I took all the literature I could and looked up the nutrient values and compared the nutrients in camel milk, cow's milk, goat milk. There was one more, I forget now what that was. So we tested the 4 milk types, and actually camel milk is the closest to human milk.
Wow, so it's kind of a pseudo breast milk.
It is a pseudo breast milk. Now, I don't know if those tests were for raw milk or pasteurized. I can't, that was not stated, but definite benefits to raw milk. The problem is you can't get it everywhere. And in some places where you can get it, like I can get it, it tastes horrible because I can only get it from non-organic, it's just disgusting. So I used to love it in Northern California, but not in Southern California.
Well, and I live in South Carolina. We're one of, I think, 8 or 9 states now where it's still legal to buy raw dairy. I know the Weston A. Price Foundation and Sally Fallon has been really pushing that whole realmilk.com website and trying to get it back. But like all these legislatures are just voting, oh no, people are dying from it. Nobody's died from raw milk. Sorry.
Nobody, no. But you can get an occasional, if the dairy, so the problem is how we handle the cows. It's not the milk, it's how we handle the cows. So if you changed and handle the cows and to get the proper meat quality and the proper animal life and how they live and what they eat, heck, if I had to eat the kind of food all day long that is not inherently my food, I would get sick, like the SAD diet, right? We all get sick from it. And if they're feeding cows soy and corn, it's not their native food. So obviously they're going to be producing different kind of milk and different kind of meat.
And then pumping them with antibiotics to prevent the sickness from killing them too early before they go to slaughter. Yeah,
it's horrible and
very
it's so disgusting, right?
By the way, earlier you mentioned Dr. Joseph Kraft. So if you want to learn more about the Kraft assays that she was talking about, go look up Ivor Cummins and Dr. Jeffrey Gerber. They did a wonderful interview with Dr. Kraft right before he died. It was just a few months before he died, very old.
They have 2 interviews. One was before, and then they had one before that.
That's right. That's right. So go look them up over on YouTube if you want to learn more. Really fascinating stuff. And that data just sat there forever and ever and ever and ever until they started interviewing him, and oh wow, we need to get this out there. And now they're kind of the gold standard of looking at how insulin impacts so much.
Well, actually, Kraft has a book. I have his book. I read it before I even heard of. That was even one of my first books for migraine that I got because I wanted to understand. And although he doesn't describe it the same way as Ivor does the best way of description. He has a chart in his book that I still remember that shows that something like over 80% of the people with type 2 diabetes completely go undetected because their fasting glucose is fine and their A1C is fine.
Yes.
And so how the A1C is fine is very interesting. So I'm very anti-A1C because it is a 3-month average of your blood glucose. But I'm a mathematician originally, and I have an engineering degree before I got my PhD in science here. So if I'm looking at mathematically what an average of 3 months is, I can choose an infinite double numbers that is going to give me an average number of 5. It can be just about anything that is going to give me an average number of 5. And that is going to have to include a high number and a low number.
Yeah.
And so if I'm looking at a reasonable range within the permitted blood glucose ranges, right? I can still create an infinite number of ranges that is going to be within that range. And some of that range is going to be a sugar crash.
Yes.
And some of that is going to be very high glucose.
Yes.
And my average is going to be completely normal.
Right.
So it's completely useless.
Well, and I always hate it when people say, no, my insulin's fine. My blood sugar is da-da-da. I'm like, no, they're not. You can't even use blood sugar as a proxy for insulin. It's kind of using total cholesterol, acting like that's some marker in your heart health. You don't know. You don't know what that total comprises. It comprises a lot of a good thing, HDL. It comprises a lot of something that we don't really know anything about the quality of, the LDL. It includes the triglycerides through the VLDL divided by 5. Triglycerides divided by 5 is the VLDL. So then that adds to the total cholesterol. And that is a bad thing. So it's like there's so many confounders. So to just put it on one number like glucose, oh my, fine. You don't know if that 85 insulin or 85 blood sugar is controlled at 85 because you've got a 25 insulin level or a 5 insulin level.
Exactly. And so people are always surprised at me when they come to me. And actually, I had a discussion with one of the doctors who we all know, and he's always at YouTube. And he was asking me, well, what is the ideal A1C? Should it go lower? And I said, no, the ideal A1C is a high one, because I can tell then I can't create two numbers that is going to give me a high number. Then I know that the person has type 2 diabetes. That is proof that the person has high blood glucose all the time. But if it goes in the normal range or a lower range, then I don't know if it's because of sugar crash and high blood glucose. So I will only accept A1C readings if it's over the normal, because then I know I cannot create the kind of ranges mathematically impossible without the person dying at first. So you have to come within the ranges. It's very difficult to explain, but it's very easy to see that, I can create 5 as an average in millimole per liter, which is what they normally use for the A1C, by averaging 10 and 2. 10 is perfect, 2, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
Average is 5.
And we always talk about insulin, but nobody ever talks about the yin and yang, the glucagon that keeps that blood sugar in a tight range. The body's not stupid. Like, the reason we keep a pretty good, even when we feed it crap, it stays in a pretty good range until you kind of break that system through the insulin resistance. By the way, you mentioned 9 out of 10 of your people that come to you with the migraines and have insulin resistance. That's matching the statistic that came out of a study just 2 years ago, where they said 87% of Americans are dealing with some spectrum of insulin resistance. So this is a pervasive problem that if we don't address the insulin resistance boogeyman, whether you're talking about migraines, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, obesity, the gamut, if we don't deal with the insulin resistance problem, we're never going to get past all of these chronic health issues people deal with.
Totally. And the biggest problem is that our system of detection is completely lacking. My own example is a good one. As a scientist myself, and my doctor is a personal friend, so he will allow me to do a little more than otherwise. And so when I first went to him 4 years ago and I said, I would like to have my insulin tested, he said, why? You're perfect. And I had an oral glucose tolerance test, passed it flying color, but they never tested insulin, only the glucose, right? And it was at a higher end. Now that I could see, at that time I didn't even know what it was, but it took me some time to understand what an oral glucose tolerance test is and what it is for, and what are the numbers that are good or bad. And it seemed on the higher end, but it was okay. And they only tested it for 2 hours or 3, I think. And so it didn't catch the reactive hyperglycemia or anything associated with it. It looked completely normal. But I said, I want to have my insulin. And he said, why would you get it? You don't need it. You're totally fine. I said, just humor me and get it to me. And I don't remember now if he finally said, no, he couldn't, because there's insurance codes that they have to enter and he couldn't enter it, or if I had to get it on my own and show it to him. But it came out, it was I've already been, by that time, I was on a low carb, high fat, and a ketogenic diet for a couple of years. So I would have expected a low normal insulin. Now it was within range. And this is important to also talk about because the insulin range on the blood test is very large. It's from 2 to 24, I think.
Horrible.
It's horribly large. And mine was, I think, 13 or 14.
Yes.
And so, and a doctor would say, well, that's totally normal. But when I went to him and I said, I think this is high because I've been on this low carb ketogenic diet for a number of years, I would have expected to read at 3 or 4. And he said, yeah, you're right. And I was really happy that he said that because, like I said, he's unconventional because he's a personal friend. But it was important to know that, yep, this is high for the way I eat.
Well, and when I did that high protein experiment, I did a at baseline. Then I had a big protein meal in my car while I was at the LabCorp office. Then I went back in about 90 minutes post-prandial to see what would happen. Going in, it was like 10 was the baseline, and at 90 minutes post-prandial, it was 24.
Wow. Okay.
So it shows you the insulinogenic effects. And I talked to Ted Damon and some different people about it. They're like, oh, chicken is very insulinogenic compared to, say, some leaner beef and things like that. So it's fascinating, like all the moving parts to this story that you can think you're eating well and think you're doing well. Like you said, you were low carb for a while and you still had that 13, 14 or whatever it was insulin.
Right.
I've dealt with the same thing. Like I've been low carb for decade and a half plus, and I still deal with some of that. I did get it down a year and a half ago, right before the pandemic. I got it down to 8, which I was pretty happy about. It's the first single digit.
It's a good one, yeah. I'm at 9 right now, so I'm about to go for the new test. Last year was my last test. I was at 9, so it's going down, but it's very slow. And I wanted to talk about another one, which you mentioned glucagon, but you haven't mentioned leptin. And so leptin is something that I tested. And this is important because I also tested my husband's. So my husband's A1C is high. So I know that he has prediabetes. He's been on ketogenic diet forever together with me. And he's not recovering. Now we're old, so I understand that we have some differences in with the speed with which we recover. And maybe it isn't even that desired to fully recover because there's some benefits to having a little bit more fat and etc. But it was interesting to see the differences in leptin. So leptin, just so those who don't know what it is, it's a hormone that basically controls your hunger. But this is what everybody knows. The other thing that leptin does, it's within our fat cells. And so it has a function of building your fat cells. It wants to build your fat cells. It's like insulin. It wants to grab every fat that there is and put it in there. So it won't let go of it. And leptin resistance, I think, is a bigger problem today than insulin resistance, but we aren't measuring it. Okay.
And you have insulin resistance, you tend to have leptin resistance as well.
For sure.
But they're not parallel. I went to see a functional, as a medical doctor who does like a lot of functional tests. And he's like, the good news is you're no longer insulin resistant. The bad news is you're mildly leptin resistant. I'm like,
That's right. And that's really funny because, I know this is going to be a public video here, but I'm going to give the numbers just so that I can show people how bad it can get. I am not overweight. I'm maybe 5-10 pounds over, but really having a tough time getting rid of it, right? My husband, on the other hand, just doesn't eat for 2 hours longer than normal and lost already 5 pounds. So it's ridiculous. And he eats 5 times as much as I do. And even though it's low carb, he's eating like an amazing amount of food. So I said, okay, let's test what is wrong here? What's different here? And so leptin came out the following. And of course, leptin, because it's associated with fat and women are supposed to have more fat. So there's a different range for men and women in terms of leptin. But still the numbers, without just any comparison of what women or men should be, my husband's leptin was 4, which is completely within normal range. What do you guess was mine?
I'm going to say 20.
How about 44?
Oh, mine was 30, by the way, was mine.
So mine is 44. Now, women need to have higher leptin. So we have a different score, and I don't know what the normal is. Maybe 15, 20 is the normal for women. Still, 11 times as much as my husband? Really? So there you go. So That
Uh,
makes it kind
don't
of,
let him hold that over your head, Angela.
no, he does.